This is Gemara and Shekalim Daf Chof. Today's shir and all the learning for the month of Nisan has been sponsored by the Grun family, Nishmas Chaim Mordechai ben Naftali Tzvi. As we conclude and move into the final few days of the Shekalim, the final few days of Nisan, all the learning of the entire Chabura should be a tremendous chos ilin nishmasai. Of course, our Chelim men v'Vego Shal ben Chaya Chaim ben Sar Shalom Sivan Yidezo Sar Bas Knendel Basim Chaysay Yisrael ben Mindol Eliezer Peres ben Shavlei Shalom Bas Naomi v'Shaviko Shevchan v'Aldovini Tiri v'Shmol ben Tila Nil ben Chan Rizim Melchai Bas Min LeBrach Bas Musa Adin Edo Bashin Mindol Zevchutav and Vegail Fasha Sviva and Vega Diverna Vichilis Vernatelia Huva Menachem Mendel ben Taiba B'Sayushar Chali Yisrael, as well as the Choshidach for Atzleia Bas Ita Em Menachem Mendel ben Eli Sheva. We pick it up in the very, very bottom of Yud Testament Beis. We are in the middle of a discussion about different cases of meat that was found in different locations, and we had the very famous machlekes when we go basar roiv in a situation where the item is found. That was the case where there was 9 kosher stores and 1 treif store, and you find meat in the middle of the street. You found the meat, you go basar roiv, and you're allowed to eat the item. And then we had the rule of kol kavua kamechsa amechsa dami, that when you buy something from a store, the item inside the store is considered to be kavua there. Since it's been to be kavua there, therefore it goes by mechsa, and therefore one cannot be mekel because these are dinei daraisa, one would not be able to eat the meat. So we conclude 2 lines on the bottom of Yud Beis that Rav Nachas, one more time, 3 times the charm. Rav Nachas, let's see, Pairi, Rav went to, not let's see, Pairi, Litaman, Rav went over there, referring to Bavel, Chamsun Mekilin, he saw they were being Mekel v'Chomer alayu, and therefore he said, you guys are being too Mekel, I have to be Machmer on you. Chad Bar Nosh, says the Gemara, I'll tell you a story. There was a certain person, Azal, as we move along to Daf Chafam and Aleph, Azal Ba'i Mishizga Asku Pite. He wanted to wash his meat Begoy Na'ara inside the river. So what happened? In Nishta Va'azalei, and he left it there. He went down to the river, he washed his meat, and then he left it by the river. Chazi ba'i misimna. So what happens? He went back to get the meat. Amar le Rav aser lecha. Rav says, no, the meat is forbidden. Tina Amar ahi shativ nara. Tina Amar, because I will say, ahi shativ nara. The piece of meat that you left there perhaps was washed away by the river. Va'isi churi dinavela tachtai. And another piece of meat of an avila came there. So how do you know that's your piece of meat? And therefore, Rav said, you're not allowed to eat that meat. We must be machmir on the meat that was left there. I know another story. Chad Bar Nash, was a person having mahalach b'shuka that was going by the marketplace to Ein Kupad, and he was carrying some meat. Also, Daisa, he saw a vulture, v'chatfase. The vulture came and took the meat, mine from him, v'taklase, and threw it down somewhere else. So he went to go take the meat. Again, a bird comes, plucks out his meat, and chucks it there. So he goes over there to go find his meat. Amar le Rav aser lecha. Rav says, I'm sorry, that meat is forbidden. Why? Because perhaps that is not kosher meat. Perhaps the vulture took your meat and it threw it down, and it took a piece of nevela meat and threw it over there. And the one that's on the floor over there is a different piece of meat. And a third story, Genai Shatav Zikin, there was a river, the Genai River. Actually, before we get to this third story, let's just make one comment. All these Gemaras are obviously reminiscent of the halachic idea in Yeridea of Basar Shenis Alim and Ayin. That when you have meat that disappears from sight and you don't know what it is, then we seeing over here that we have to be concerned that perhaps a vulture dropped it off, but it's really not so simple. We've given a share on this in the past. It's really not so simple because there has to be a real possibility that your meat disappeared and there's another piece of meat. Just in a simple case, this was a piece of meat. I don't think we usually just leave meat lying on the floor. Usually meat is in a packaging and this and that. I don't think vultures are going to the local supermarket, picking up meat in a package and dropping it down, which would be one reason. But of course, there are different halachas, which we cannot get into now. But as we're about to see in the next Gemara, always the Eitz is going to be a chaysam b'sei chaysam. The Eitz is going to be shnei chaysamis, 2 seals, that anytime something is double sealed, then we're going to see that we're going to have no concern. So let's see that right now. Says the Gemara, Ginai Shatav Zikin. The Genai River washed away some wineskins, also of the Kumei Rav Yitzchak. So he came in front of Rav Yitzchak, Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Elazar. Va'amar, and he said, Yach kimun shape kitzrayon. the ones who pour the wine, let them come and see if they recognize the kitzurayin, the knots on the wineskin. Because again, if they recognize the knot that was tied up the wineskin, then we don't have to be worried, because obviously those are the ones that they lost. And another story, Nikuninya Shtakach, a container of wine was found b'chnishta de Buli in the Beis HaKnesses, in the shul of Buli, also of the Kumi Rav Yirmiyah. The story came from Rav Yirmiyah Amar, and he said, Yitzchak min Sekureyu, Yitzchakmun Sekuraya Avid Tayon. Let those who make the Sekurayu, the red marks on the containers, let them come and see. Again, can you recognize something about this to show that this is that one and it was not tampered? And another story, Avid Tayon. And another story, Gedid Sali, a roasted kiddush takach ba'asratia de Gufta was found in the Asratia, which is the big streets of Gufta. V'teirua, and they made it, and they said you're allowed to eat that. What's the reason? Mishum shnei devarim. Number one, mishum mitzia. There's no issue of the mitzia, which we'll see why in a moment. And number two, mishum roi malchid drachim. Let's see right now. Number one, mishum mitzia. Why is it permitted? The tani, because we learn hamatz or miara ari. If someone says something from a lion, miara gayis from soldiers, mishun asayam, from the overflow of the river, mishun asanar, the ocean and the river, Umisratia Gedayla, or a large Shimflatia Gedayla, large plaza, Harelu Shalai. In the rules of finding a Mitzia, you find money in the middle of Times Square, you don't have to be worried about it, because there's a million people over there. If we say that, what's the reason? Mimnei, a very famous idea, Gemara about Mitzia, obviously, that the owner gives up hope. If someone drops $1 in the middle of the street, we assume that the owner, as soon as he realizes he doesn't have it, he realizes, oh, that's lost. No way I'm finding my $1. That is reason number one, that we don't have to be concerned about an Aveda. Number two, Misham Roi Malchid Drachim, Misham Shchitas Nachri. Do we have to be concerned that a guy shachted it? Meaning, because Roiv of the people in that place were Yiddish, were Jewish, and therefore we're allowed to assume that the meat that was found is going to be kosher meat. And that was the reason why, in this case, the meat that was found, they let them keep it, and it's not an issue of mitzia, number one, and number two, they let them eat it, and we assume that it's going to be a kosher shchita. Story number two, vishkachach, in the end of that story, and they found out at the end of the day, min de Beis Rabbi, that really the meat was in the house of Rabbi, obviously almost supporting this story. Obviously it's not an ironclad proof. Even if we didn't know who it came from, it would be mutter. But the Gemara is just showing us at the end of the day, it found out to be like they suggested. And another story, Igel de Gobni, there was a round cheese, that was found in the house, in the pundik, in the inn of Levi, and similarly he said you're allowed to keep it because of these following two ideas. Number one, Misham Mitzia. Number two, Misham Roi Malchid Drachim. Number one, Misham Mitzia. Why? Ditania Matzal Miyara Gayis, Umiyara Hari, Mishunas Hayom, Umishunas Anar, Misrata Gedela, Miflata Gedela, Hari Lishalai. That all these ideas, you save something from a lion, you save something from a river and then an ocean, or it's the middle of a tremendous street. In all these cases, we assume that you're allowed to keep it. Why? Because whoever lost it obviously gave up hope on them. And number two, Misham Roi Malchid Drachim. You're allowed to keep it. Why? Mishum Givinas Nachri. Are we concerned that a guy made it? Again, the same idea, because most of the people in that place were Jewish, so we assume the cheese is going to be kosher as well. And the end of the story, again, was a happy ending. Mishtach Minder of Lazar, Bir Rav Yosef, they found that it actually belonged to Rav Elazar bin Rav Yosi. Amar Rav Mana Kumi Rav Yosi, finishing off this Mishnah, this halacha, says Rav Mana in front of Rav Yosi, Vanan Chamyon Rabbanin Machrizin. But we when we find something in the public, we announce it. Meaning, even though we just learned to find something in the middle of the street, you're allowed to keep it. Says Raman in front of Rav Yosi, but us, the Rabbanon, we're more machmir. We find something in the middle of the street, we make sure to announce it, even though we do not have to. Amar lei, at enav yasam, at in Aviyasa Mishkachach Loi Nisavta. Are you serious? If you find something, you're not going to take it? Rav Yoina Avuch Loi Amerkain. Rav Yoina, your father never did that. If he found something, he said, in the middle of the street, I'm allowed to keep it. Elo Amar Halavai. What would your father Rav Yoina say? Halavad kan Hishkach Nishkach Min Payasi Avalugvaya. Halavai would have found this item in a larger place, meaning in a place that I'd be able to keep it. So what are you saying? But the Gemara concludes, if you law Cain, Ishkach V'loi Nasiv, at the end of the day, they were more machmer on themselves and they would announce it. So again, Now is not the time for all these halachas, but the basics, one could understand that if it's an item in a tremendous place with no simanim and no way of finding the owner, then automatically we assume the owner was miyayish and you're allowed to keep it. That was halacha number one. Halacha number two is we see again that we're going after the roiv when something is found in the middle of the street. But like we pointed out before, that the eitzah in all these cases, anytime you're going to be leaving food in a public place, etc., is going to be a double knot, says in Yaradeya. Basically, a chaysim say chaysim is in a way, a tamper-proof is the easiest way of explaining it, which is the reason why, obviously, all sealed containers, we're not worried, because they're tamper-proof, no one could open them up without it being noticed. But a simple eitzah, let's say someone has a bottle of milk and they have to keep it in a public fridge. Take one bag, tie it with a knot, take a second bag and tie it with a knot, and therefore we assume that no one's going to untie both and retie both in a way that it's not going to be discernible, and that would be the way to take care of it, or to take one knot and put a piece of tape over it. Let's move onward. Says the third halacha in the seventh parak, Masnisa, back to halacha that we spoke about a few days ago, items that you find, what do we assume those items were? Says the Mishnah, now we're going to discuss, we spoke back then about the 13 different boxes, the money found between the different boxes. Now we're going to discuss the animals that are found. So if you find an animal in Yerushalayim Migdal Eder, in a place called Migdal Eder, Ukmidasel Chal Ruach, and similarly, that's a distance, Yerushalayim to Migdal Eder. So that distance in all different sides, what's the halacha? Zacharim, Oilais, Nekevais, Zivchei Shlamim. The male animals, we assume they're a Leila, and the female animals, we're going to assume they are a Shlamim. Rav Yehuda Aimer says, Rav Yehuda, Reilib Psachim, Psachim Kodim L'Regel Yamiyayim. Within 30 days of Pesach, then we can assume that anything you find is going to be a Pesach, if it's right to be a Karban Pesach, obviously, fulfilling the conditions of a Karban Pesach, which we learned about extensively. But in the beginning, they would tell someone who found an animal, they would take a mashkin from him. They would take collateral from him. Why are they taking collateral from him? In order to make sure that he doesn't only bring the proper Karban. Again, let's just play out the case. You're walking down the street of Yerushalayim, you find an animal there. So what did we just learn? We just learned that animal is a zachar, a male animal. You have to bring it as an ayla. Now, not only do you have to bring it as an ayla, there are other halachas of an ayla. You have to bring the nesachim, the libations, together with the animal, which means it's going to cost you some personal money. So in the beginning, they would go and take a mashkin, take a collateral from the person that found it in order to ensure that he brought the right nisachim, the right libations with the carbon. Achu maybe iman nisachel, till they would bring together with it the nisachim. I don't need this. I don't need beavers to pick a top of me, they're taking collateral from me, they're forcing me to bring the nisachim. Forget it, I'm not going to take the animal. They would just leave it there, which of course is terrible. So Iskinu Bezdin, so Bezdin made a takanashi nisachel, boy Michel Tzibur. So he said, okay, fine, you bring the carbon that you found, and the community, the communal funds will pay for the nisachim for the different libations. Continues the Mishnah Amar of Shimon, Zayin Dvar Miskinu Bezdin. There were 7 takanas, 7 enactments of Bezdin, and this one was number one. So number one is that the nisachim of a found carbon comes from the tzibur. Number two, Nachrish Shalach Eilas from Dinas Hayam, if a guy sends a carbon Eilah from Dinas Hayam from overseas, V'shalach iman nisachim, and he sends with it the nisachim Karivim Mishalai. Then we bring the carbon the guy sends. Of course, guys are allowed to bring carbonis, so we bring the carbon for the guy, and we bring it with the nisachim that the guy sent. V'imlav, let's say the guy doesn't send nisachim, but the halach is you can't bring an Eilah without the nesachim, without the libations. So who should pay for the libations of the guy? Says the Mishnah, Kuriva Mishal Tzibur. Again, that is number 2. That's going to come from communal funds. And number 3, V'chein ger shemeis a convert that dies and he leaves over karbanos. So if he leaves over also the different wines and oils, etc., then we bring it from his own. Then it comes from the tzibur. Number 3. Number 4, utanai bezdin al kohen gadol shemeis bezdin made it tonight on a kohen gadol that dies shetei mincha like kriva mishal tzibur, that his mincha, the minchas chavitin, which we're going to learn about toward on Amud Beis into tomorrow, the Minchas Chavitin, the special carbon that a Kohen Gadol had to bring every day. Every other Kohen had to bring it once in their lifetime. So what happens if a Kohen dies before he's able to bring that carbon? The halacha is it comes from the communal funds to bring that carbon. Rav Yehuda Aimer, no, it doesn't come from the communal funds, but rather, where does it come from? It comes Mishel Yarshim, comes from the inheritors of the Kohen Gadol. Ushleima Hisakriva. That line, this line, Ushleima Hisakriva, is going to be the very end of today, perhaps even tomorrow's daf. That Shleima Hisakriva, they would bring this carbon mincha whole. We're going to have to learn exactly what that means, but the basic idea is when the Kohen Gadol was alive, he would bring this minchas chavitin, this special carbon mincha. He would bring it in half in the morning and half in the afternoon. But when he was nifter, then we bring it whole. What exactly that means, we will see in the Gemara. Number 5, the salt and the wood in the Beis Hamikdash, we allow the Kohanim to get benefit from it. The salt to karbanis, the wood to burn the karbanis, we allow the Kohanim to benefit from it. Number 6, on the ashes of the para aduma, that there's no din of me'ila with the ashes. They're allowed to use the me'ila. We'll see what that means. And number 7, that the psulas kinim, again, the kinim we know are the bird karbanis brought by a woman for a zava or a yeledes. So if they are pasul, the halacha is going to be, it comes from the communal funds. An idea that we've seen already, says Rav Yisi, no, the one that supplies it, the vendors. Again, the Beis Hamikdash used to purchase these birds from different suppliers. So they made a tanai, as we'll see again today. They made special conditions with them. One of the conditions they made was in the event that the bird becomes disqualified, you, the vendor, have to absorb the loss and resupply Bezdin, the Beis Hamikdash, with a new carbon. That's the machlekes between the Tanakam and Rav Yisi, who brings that bird, whether it comes from the tzibur or it comes from the vendors. Says the Gemara back in the first part of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah spoke about, before these 7 takanas, spoke about an animal that is found. We said if it's found in Yerushalayim, a male is an ayla, a female is a shlamim. Says the Gemara, Rav Haishia Rabba Amar, Lavai b'demeim shanu. Says Rav Haishia, the case over here is not that you're bringing the actual carbon, but rather the case is you find an animal. Now you find this animal, what you're going to do is you're going to bring the monetary value of that animal as the carbon that is under discussion, and this will come more clear in a moment. But basically, the reason is, if you find a male animal, the Mishnah said you bring it as an ayla. How could you bring it as an ayla? It might be a shlamim. A shlamim could be either male or female. So if you find a male animal, how you let assume it's an ayla? That's the reason why the Mishnah is teaching us now. What do? What you do is you're going to take the animal and you're going to remove the kedusha, the sanctity, onto money. And with that money, you're going to purchase 2 karbanis, an ayla and a shlamim. And you're going to say, if it's an ayla, it's an ayla. If it's a shlamim, it's a shlamim. And then you're going to bring that onto the Beis Hamikdash. But says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom, Yechafam and Aleph, Amle Rav Yechran, Aimer Ladim, Seyumal Bekachim. 1 second, you're not allowed to do that. We always spoke about the din of Tamura, the din of changing the sanctity from animal A to animal B. And we always pointed out that it's an Isser to do that. You're not allowed to change the sanctity from animal A to animal B. If you do it, it works. So over here, how are we telling the person that found this animal, go and remove the Kedusha of something else? You're not allowed to do that. Ella, says the Gemara, Hilchu B'em Acharayv. No, you do. You go after Roiv. Im Roiv Zacharim Aylois, Vim Roiv Nekirois, Zivchei Shlamim. It's a little bit difficult to read. If what you found is going to be male, then Roiv Zacharim Aylois, the majority of the males are ayla, so you're going to be allowed to bring it as an ayla. If what you found is a female, then Roiv Nekirois, Zivchei Shlamim, and you're going to be allowed to bring it as a shlamim. And that's what you're going to do. Says the Gemara, 1 second. How can you say that? Like we spoke about, a shlamim comes from both male and females. So how can you assume that if it's majority are going to be males, going to be an ayla, it could also be a shlamim? Answers the Gemara, so you do. I said, what do you do? Rather, what you do is you remove the animal, you remove the sanctity, the kedusha, and you make a chulin. And then you go and you make them moving along to Amid Beis, and we'll speak in a moment exactly what was the difference between here and the Havamina. And then you make them into an Ayla. Basically, what you're going to have to do over here is you're going to have to change the Kedusha onto 2 other animals. Now, why? I know I said we're going to speak this out, but it's not. I should just say, we'll just speak it out as a question. We'll leave it at that. It's not 100% clear why you're going to be allowed to do this. Because like we just spoke out in Amar Aleph, we're not allowing you to you're not allowing you to change the Kedusha. So we'll just, one detail is when it says Ayla, it means even an Ayla, that basically you're going to have to put onto 2 animals. Perhaps that was what changed in the Havamina. But let's see a little bit further. The other Turutzim will be a little bit easier to understand. Amar Rav Zira Kama Da'at Omar Tamon, like we learned over there, Tanai Bezin Hu. So now it's very simple. So he learns this is all a stipulation that Bezin always makes. Hu Alamai Sarais Shekir Ru'ailis. Says Rav Zir, just like we know that what's the halacha? If you separate money for a carbon and you have excess money, there's a special Tanai Bezdin that you bring the excess money for an Ayla. So too, came Amar of Hachi, Tanai Bezdin Hu Alayvdai Shekir Ru'ailis. So too over here, it's going to be a special Tanai Bezdin that it's going to come from the oilais, and that you're going to be allowed to bring it as an oila, and we're not worried. Says the Gemara, Rav Yisrael, Rav Yaakov Aracha, Ein Zeh Mezid. What are you doing? Like we said before, this should at some level be called a mezid, a deliberate changing of kedusha from A to B. Amar Le Mekimashu Tanai Bezdin Ein Zeh Mezid. No, since Bezdin stipulated that this should be done, it's not considered a mezid. So that's what someone's going to do if he finds the carbon. He's going to have to either right away change the Kedusha or put onto two animals, the two different ways of learning the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, we're going to continue with the Kohen Gadol. In the Mishnah, the Kohen Gadol, we said it brings a carbon minchas chavitin every single day of his career. And we said that same carbon is brought by a Kohen Hedyot once in his lifetime. The first day that he works in the Beis HaMikdash, he brings that carbon, the mincha. Whereas the Kohen Gadol brings it every single day. Those two details are important. Now, Mirza Hashem, the Gemara will run smoothly. 6 lines down. Amar Rav Yasa. At the Onataman, while I was over there in Bavel, Shamaz Kol Rav Yehuda, I heard the voice of Rav Yehuda Shal Shmuel. I heard him asking Shmuel the following: Hifrish Shkala Yumeis. What's Allah if someone separates his Shkalim? Umeis, we've seen this already. Amalei Yibel Nadava. The money goes to Nadava. This first part of what we're quoting is not what we need. It's going to be the second part. Umeiser Asir Seifer Shaloi. What about the excess of money to bring the Siris Haifa? Rav Yechlan Amar, you have to destroy it. Rav Lazar Amar, Yiblin Nadava, Siris. No, you bring it, Yiblin Nadava, I'm sorry. You bring it for Nadavais. Asiris Haifa shall Kohen Gadol. What about this special carbon, this Minchas Chavitin, that Siris Haifa of the Kohen Gadol? What do you do with that? So this is the point that we need. We have a machlekes between Rav Yechlan and Rish Lakish. What do we do? Rav Yechlan Amar, Choitza Oisa, Va'achar Kach Maktisha. Says Rav Yechlan, you know what you do? You first chaytza, you first split it into two. Like we said, the minchas chavitin is brought in two halves, this carbon mincha, this bread. So split it into and then be makdish it. V'shim and Lakish Aimer, no. Mikadsha v'achar kach chaytza. First you make it holy, and then you're going to split it into two. So machlokes Rav Yechlan and Rish Lakish, how do we deal with this situation? Are we first going to split it in half and then be makdish it? Which of course everyone right away could realize what that basically is going to happen is only the part that you need is going to become hektish. Whereas according to Reish Lakish, no, you're makdish the entire entity. Then you're going to split it in half. So according to Reish Lakish, and everything is going to have kedusha. So with that understanding, the Gemara now brings a raya to Rav Yechlan and Rish Lakish. Masnita Maligal Rav Yechlan. The Mishnah is a raya to Rish Lakish. It argues on Rav Yechlan. Because what did the Mishnah say? Makriv mechsa umechsa avad. That the second half has to be lost. Why are you losing the second half? Must be that there's kedusha on the entire thing. If you understand that there's kedusha on the entire thing, then I understand the Mishnah. Like Rish Lakish. That's the first half you bring. The second half you don't need it anymore. Again, the Kohen Gadol died in the middle of the day. He brought his first half in the morning. The second half he didn't bring yet. So says the Mishnah, bring one half, another half you throw into the garbage. I understand that according to Reish Lakish. Because according to Reish Lakish, the entire entity that you're makdish has kedusha, so the second half you have to throw away. Explains the Gemara, no. No, we're going to explain why are you destroying the second half? Because just like the extra money is going to be destroyed, so to here, even though it doesn't really have Kedusha according to Rav Yochanan, but still, just like the money you have to destroy when it's in excess, you'll have to destroy the excess of the mincha. Now, we have the braya the other way. Mastita poligar Reish Lakish, meaning a raya to Rav Yochanan. What does the Mishnah say? Nimsu shnei chatzayin. If you find two halves, krivin, you bring both them. Ushnei chatzayin avudim. If you find two halves, they're both brought and they're both lost. V'tani Allah, what exactly does that mean? Explains in a brisa. Mechsa rishon u'mechsa sheni. the first half and the second half to ubar surasan. You have to let them lose their appearance. You have to let base sreifa and then destroy it. So according to Rav Yochanan, this makes a lot of sense. But according to Rish Lakish, what's the reason that you have to wait for them to have an ibar tsura to lose their form and be destroyed? According to Rish Lakish, the entire entity has kedusha. If the entire entity has kedusha, according to Rish Lakish, right away you should destroy it. For the fact that the Bryce explains you have to wait for it to lose its form. That sounds like Rav Yochanan. Sounds like you have to wait for it to lose its form. So that would be right. Rav Yochanan explains the Gemara. Pasar la Rav Yishmael. No, we'll explain like Rav Yishmael. The Amar Isaron Mikadesh Mikdash. Isaron Mikadesh, who says that in the Isaron, in the utensil, when they measure it out, that's when it receives the Kedusha. That's what Rish Lakish is going to learn. And that's the reason why you're going to have to wait for it to lose its form. Go and burn it. Explains the Gemara. Says that this is furthermore, further in the Bryce, I should say, discussing about this minchas chavitin, this carbon of the kohen gadol. When the kohen comes for the first time to bring this carbon la'avoda, maybe asir sa'ifa shalai, he brings his asir sa'ifa, like we said, this carbon minchas chavitin, the first time of his career. And he brings it on its own. Echad kohen gadol ve'echad kohen hedyet sha'avdu ad shle'aviu asir sa'ifa shalahem. Whether kohen gadol or kohen hedyet does it to bring the asir sa'ifa, avodas geshira, meaning they're both allowed to bring it. Obviously, different points of their careers. Rav Mana ba'i meimar asks Rav Mana, boi ba'yom sheniskariv techila. The first time that the kohen gadol, I should say, the first time that let's just read. Kohen, the first time he brings it, we'll see what it means in a moment. La voida, boy b'yoyim nisman aliyos kohen gadol. Wow, the first time a kohen, his first day at the job, he never worked in the Beis Hamikdash. His first attempt, that day they made him kohen gadol. So now we have two things converging very interestingly. We have his obligation to be the minchas chavitin because it's first day on job, and we have obligation to bring him minchas chavitin because he's a kohen gadol. Says the Gemara, mevi in shtayim, he has to bring two. Achaz lechinuchai for the first time. Achaz lechayis hayayim as a kohen gadol, and some actually explain that it means three, but let's leave it at the pashe pshat. So that kohen, because these two of them coincided, he'll bring two on that day. Now, more halachas of his minchas chavitim. Tufine, says the Gemara, says the pasuk, it has to be baked. B'shas hava tufune v'mishachar stefine. That has to be baked at the time that you bring it, and not early in the morning. They made those who make the chavita to make the chavitim, and this is referring to a certain time, early in the morning. So it sounds like the minchas chavitim, when you're making these breads, has to be done early in the morning, not like you just suggested. What that means is making the scalding hot water for it. That's made earlier in the morning, but the actual baking is going to be later. Tufine. Now we learn further. What does it mean baked? Ravasi b'shem Rav Chanina, mitagna v'achach. First they fried it and then they baked it. Ravacha b'shem Rav Chanina mitagna. Machlek is how exactly they prepared these breads. Was it first baked and then fried, or vice versa? Tufine. Now we learn further. The pasuk says, Tufine to oifenu na. It should be baked na nicely. It should be pretty, as we'll see in a moment what that means. Rabbi Omer to oifena na. A little bit different. So the gears over here, it's a little bit repetitive. We take out one of those. Rav Daisa Omer Ta'afeno Riba. It should be baked a lot. Says the Gemara, Asyan Al Yon Pelukta Kehinon, Bepuluktan, that these all like these. Manda Amar Ta'afeno No. The first Manda Amar said it has to be baked nicely, it has to be pretty. What does that mean? Kemanda Amar Oife Vach Metagna. It means you first bake and then you fry it. Manda Amar Ta'afeno No. Kemanda Amar Metagna Vach Chayfa. The exact opposite. I'm sorry, I read it. Let me just apologize. There's two na's. That's why I got confused. There's na and there's na'ah. That was a little bit of the Gemara. It's not a gears to change. Apologies. Na means partially cooked, and na'ah with an aleph means pretty. So now the Gemara is explaining the first man damra means it's cooked and then it's fried. The second man damra means it's fried and then it's cooked. Lo yisef davar shemeis. Not only in the case as the Gemara, and the kohen gadol dies, that we're going to bring the carbon for him. Even if the kohen gadol is tamei or he has a mum, we're going to bring this carbon for him. And we'll conclude. Tani we learned of Yehuda bar Pazi Devar Dalia. Rav Yehuda Bar Pazi learned in a Mishnah, that's the Vardal, you learned in a Bryce, I should say, Va'afilu nidcha mimum, and even if he has he's not allowed to work in the Beis Mikdash because of a mum. Says the Gemara, Menayin the Kohen Gadol shemeis v'lo yamina acher tachtav, the concept we spoke about on the top of the Amid. How do we know if a Kohen Gadol dies and we appoint another one, Shtei min chazak krivim mishal yarshim, and in the interim, before we got the new Kohen Gadol, so who brings the carbons? We said a machlekes in the Mishnah. It comes from the Yarshim, the inheritors, or it comes from the Tzibur? So the first man Damar said it comes from the inheritors. How do we know that? Tamalaymar mibanav ye oisa. That comes from the banav. Yachal yavianu lechatzayim. You would think you're allowed to bring this carbon in halves. Tamalamar oisa kula amarti diver Rav Yehuda has to be brought fully. So Rav Yehuda learns it comes from the Yarshim, it has to be brought fully. Rav Shimon Aimer inay ba el mishal tzibur. Shnemer chayke lam misha bris karusa lai chayke lam. It's a rule forever. What's a rule forever? Well, the one that made the covenant, meaning the tzibur, the klal yisrael, the entire community, Kalil, take their kilil laktari. He's the one that has to bring it to burn it. So that is the halachas of minchas chavitim, this fascinating carbon that the Kohen Gadol brings every day. Kohen brings once in his life. What happens if he dies in the interim? You have to bring the carbon from him. Do we learn now from Banav that it comes from his children? Do we learn out that it comes from the tzibur? And we'll pick up from here tomorrow.